everyone. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, online medical education, online investigator meetings, development of treatment pathway journeys. And since the launch of our awards-winning Insight Events platform, we've also helped pharmaceutical companies with innovation hackathons, MSL training, corporate events, and everything in between. But more importantly at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from the big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, digital provocateurs, and healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super excited to having one of these healthcare thought leaders with me at the table today. This is actually Dr. Bassil Akra. He has extensive experience in leadership, business management, research, development, quality management, and regulatory approval of medical devices, combination devices, as well as ATMP products. Currently, he's the CEO and owner of AKRA Team. It's a consultancy firm that he founded in 2021 to support various stakeholders and healthcare stakeholders in achieving their targets in a very regulated business area. He has spent the last year consulting and supporting medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and combination device companies preparing their strategy for the new EU regulations, which we're going to get into today. Before that, he spent many years as a subject matter expert at the biggest notified body in Europe, partaking in various European guidance documents and international standard precautions. He played an essential role during the implementation of the medical device regulations changes in Europe. Welcome, Dr. Bassil Akra. So happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for inviting me to be with you here today. And I'm very excited about our discussion and what we're going to be talking about today about Europe or other regions as well.
Absolutely. So I think what a lot of times the audience likes to get a little bit of an idea of who we're listening to. Maybe you can actually start off because it's a very interesting area that you're in. Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory and how you landed and founded the ACRA team and where you were leading this company today.
So my background, so when I started, actually, I wanted always to be an inventor. I wanted always to create something, to create a difference, to have medical devices, to support the patient, to help patients understanding actually having a different future. So when I started actually, went to medical school, then went to engineering school, and I wanted to be actually a biomedical engineer, a medical engineer who was able to create something different to help people. And I never thought that I would be ending a regulatory. So at that time, when you are an inventor, you wanted actually to be flexible. You don't want to have anyone telling you what you are not allowed to do, but you want to be actually flexible. And I got into regulatory field actually by accident, because you suddenly, when you are developing and designing and developing product, you recognize if you want to get them to the end on the market, you need to get a regulatory involvement. So you need to have actually an understanding of what is expected. And then when I started working on it, and it was much more in the pharmaceutical field at the very beginning, I recognized it's interesting, it's different. I didn't trust it at the beginning because I felt like, could it be like a boring task, or is it actually something that I would like as an inventor? And then I recognize it's actually a kind of research. It's nothing else than actually what you do in researching for a new product. It's something which allow you to be also supporting, creating different views and helping as well, getting product easier or quicker to the market. So this is how I moved to regulatory. And then I started working for a notified body. In Europe, notified bodies are like in the US, you have FDA, which is actually governmental, whereas in Europe, it's actually delegated to third parties who are organization who decides to act in the name of the European Commission. And they are private entities who are acting in that field, but they are controlled by the member state and by the European Commission. So I started working there and being involved in medical device approval process. And I had like multiple functions, from leading the clinical team up to cardiovascular, orthopedic, and various areas, and ended at the end in a leadership on a management board and being involved in multiple tasks across the globe, which enabled me actually to have a better view about what are the problems on the market and where are organizations struggling. So being on that side of the game, you recognize you always ask questions, you always challenge others. And this was actually the reason to say, I want to help others and not telling them what is not possible, but tell them how they can make it possible. Because as you know, FDA or regulators are not allowed to consult you on how to do it. They will tell you what is wrong. And I wanted to be on the other side to help people getting their strategy, getting their product approved, and getting market access to ensure that patient is getting the treatment on time.
Beautiful, wonderful. And so all of that to say is that you have decided to start an actual consultancy company, AKRA Team. Tell us a little bit about how the team got started and what are some of your core fundamental services and what you provide medical device companies.
So the start of AKRA Team was an idea to help. This was the inspiration behind it, to say, we have knowledge, we don't have machine, we don't have products. What we have expertise, we have knowledge as persons that we can share and help others using that knowledge to be actually on the right pathway towards achieving compliance. How it started actually was the fact that me as a person, I bring the knowledge in the medical device regulation and the regulations in the various fields in Europe and the interpretation of also what is written in guidances. And I wanted to share this knowledge with others. And then I could win a lot of team members who are very good and very knowledgeable, and they could help as well, scaling the level of services that we can deliver. So now we are, as a team, multiple resources with clinical background, technical background, biocompatibility background, who helps the various organizations implementing the requirement accordingly, but also understanding the language of a regulator. Because the biggest challenge, which I always see, that regulators speak, even if they speak the same English language, but it's a different way how they present their wording. And if you don't, I always say I speak multiple languages plus the regulatory language, which is a nice actually ability to help people understand the obligations.
So let's sort of kind of get started. Tell us a little bit about the target audience that we know that there's many different stakeholders in the healthcare space. We have a large following of pharmaceutical companies. Medical device companies are similar but different. Tell us a little bit about how you define a medical device company and who do you specifically target within that sort of ecosystem as well.
So we don't just target actually medical device or in vitro diagnostic companies. We help also notified bodies in getting designated because they are private entities as well. And they might need also our help on understanding and the obligation and preparing their system. So what we target is actually every single stakeholder in this medical device, regulated medical device field or in vitro diagnostic field, where they feel they need support on understanding the legislation in Europe. So this is what we target. Who are the people within the organization who are, let's say, in contact with us? Those are actually people who are responsible for regulatory affairs, clinical affairs, quality management system within the operations. So typically the VP for RAQA, depending on the organization, they might be actually different people, or the VP for clinical, people responsible for clinical studies within the organization, people responsible for post-market surveillance, for risk management. Those are the people that contact us. They want to speak to us because either they have like a plan about a new product or they have actually challenge which they are facing on implementing the requirement because of not being able to let's say, follow what is written in the legislation by themselves, or they can follow it, but they have limitation on capacity, which push them in a direction to get third-party support. And there are also other reasons, which could be strategic reasons that they say we delegate activities to an external parties.
Beautiful. So let's sort of dig in here. The EU has released a series of different changes for around medical device regulations. Tell us a little bit about what some of these changes are and why they're important.
So as I mentioned before, we help actually the organization in medical device and in vitro diagnostics. The European legislator decided in 2017 to publish two regulations, which are a revision of old directives. So we had in the past directive, which were from the 90s. So in the 90s, we had like rules in Europe for medical devices and in vitro diagnostics that required actually a revision after years of being published because of state of the art, new expectation, new interpretation, and so on. But we also had some scandals in Europe or as well across the globe, which led to acceleration of the implementation of those regulations. So the European legislators published those documents. And if you look to them, the focus of those documents is actually to achieve more transparency, but also to achieve more evidence-based medical device and in vitro diagnostic devices on the market. So what they did in those legislations, they actually rebuilt the decision on which product are covered by those regulations. So for example, they added to the medical device regulation devices without an intended medical purpose. So like a contact lens, which is colored, it's medical device in Europe. Even so, it's not correcting the vision. So it becomes actually more regulated for even Halloween party contact lenses. They are medical devices, so you have to fulfill those obligations. We have also devices which underwent an up classification, which means they're gonna have more scrutiny, such as apps, because in the past, in the 90s, nobody discussed about software as a medical device. Today, everyone is discussing about that. And the European legislator needed to address that by the new legislation. So they built a clear classification for those devices, and a lot of them underwent now higher scrutiny with the new legislation. The problem which is connected to all of these things as well is actually the fact that they said even the notified bodies who are the third parties, which are acting in the European system, they have to be requalified as well. So they have also to meet a lot of new obligation, which lead to redesignation of all of these notified bodies to show also compliance to the applicable requirement. On top of this, those regulations are including higher requirement on clinical, on performance. So manufacturer would need to do more studies, more clinical data collection to be able to achieve compliance. And finally, and I'm just like keeping this on a high level because we don't want to go into that detail because this would mean a full training on MDR and IVDR. But just to give you like an insight, they added also higher requirement on a post-market level. So in Europe, not like in the US, in Europe, when you get the certification for a device for market access, you get it for 5 years maximum. So you have, this is your ability to place a device on the market. And then you have to renew your certificate to be able to get that device again on the European market. What they did as well, they increased the post-market surveillance obligation, and which means manufacturers are required nowadays to have more post-market surveillance report, more activities on a post-market level to ensure continuous compliance. And they need to create reports, a lot of them, depending on the risk, either annually or biennially, which means it's a lot of additional resources that you are required to have as an organization to be able to deal with all of these requirements. And the final challenge is actually interpreting the requirement and understanding what is written there and how this will impact your organization.
So one of the things I think probably comes to a lot of people's minds, you're a medical device company or software is a medical device company, and perhaps you actually launched your product and it's now actively in the market and available before the regulations came through. Is the specifications around continuous high-level evidence post, launch, post-market still required of those companies, or have they effectively been grandfathered?
There is no grandfathering. This is a very good point that you are mentioning, Natalie, because the European legislation didn't think about grandfathering products. So every device, even if it has been on the market since the 50s, it has to re-undergo a certification under the new legislations. And this is a big challenge, which is actually connected with the system. So if we look to the US, for example, when the US FDA introduced a new requirement, they take a risk-based approach and they say, okay, those devices are grandfathered and they will not have to fulfill all of these obligations. And those devices which need to meet the new requirement. Whereas Europe, now they said, we're gonna restart the system from scratch. So everything has to be recertified, which has been placed on the market since many years already, and they have to re-qualify according to the new rules.
Now, a lot of times, especially when we're associating HTA countries, as they're looking at assessments and evaluations of pharmaceutical products, I'm curious if these new regulations relating to medical devices are also correlated with the private and public payer reimbursement system in terms of market access and who eventually and how these products are eventually paid for and everything around, outcomes-based agreements, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about how AKRA Team or this whole regulations piece comes into play for the eventual payment or reimbursement of these kinds of products.
So the new regulation doesn't care actually about reimbursement. The new regulation tell you whether you are allowed to place a device on the market or not. There are additional obligations and requirements in the various European countries with regard to reimbursement. So passing the burden of being certified to access a market doesn't guarantee that you're going to get paid for the product that you're going to be placing on the market. And the problem what's going to happen, and this played an important role, at the end, the patient going to decide, the healthcare system going to decide. So even if you get all of these efforts and you could achieve re-certifying your product on the market, it doesn't mean that you can increase your price unbelievable in the high, because it's not doable, because at the end they will tell you this is a reimbursement fee that you will get for your product. And this is why when you look to your strategy and every organization which we are supporting, we look to two actually parts. The one part is actually, is it doable to achieve compliance? And the other part, does it make sense business-wise to re-get that product approved in Europe, considering the business case connected to it? Because reimbursement going to play an important role here. And at the end, even if you invest in a product, you need to think as an organization, can I get my investment paid back, or it's not doable considering the pricing and the way how reimbursement is happening.
Now, we obviously realize that the EU has implemented these new stringent and sometimes considered difficult regulations. So in your opinion, Basile, what is going to be the changes in other countries, in the US, sort of ex-Europe? What are you foreseeing? And is AKRA Team looking at extending their assistance and their expertise into other jurisdictions?
Yeah, so those are two questions. Let me start with the first part of your question. What we see already in the past, when I was working for a notified body, at that time, manufacturer came with innovation to us. They said, we want to get that product first to Europe because European system is lean, is reasonable, and this is how we get innovation quicker to the market. Today, manufacturer decide to go to the US first. Why? Because US is reasonable, predictable, and clear. With the new regulation, we are moving to uncertainty. If you have an innovation, and if you are a startup, you are even a big manufacturer who has an innovation, the most important thing for you is actually timeline and predictability, because you can't actually afford delays which are unjustifiable. And the European system is actually like a newborn system, which is still under development, which is unclear what to expect, and you could face a lot of surprises. So manufacturers are directing their product now to the US first, and they say, we'll come back to Europe later on when we have more clarity, and we have actually the data which are necessary for the European legislation. So there is already a shift to the US. Now, to your second part of the question, at this moment, AKRA Team is focusing on helping manufacturers getting to Europe based on the amount of efforts connected to the European legislation and the amount of, let's say, time you need to spend as an expert to help manufacturers getting to the European system. But we are currently as well helping manufacturers who have innovative product from the beginning. And if we are like involved in such an innovative product, we help them actually in both directions, US as well as Europe, to make sure that they can get the benefit of a global strategy, because this is the best way that you can get your product to the market. It's not our focus business, but we are doing this for some special devices, especially for innovation getting to the market for the first time.
So I was actually also just curious about some of the services you provide around the clinical trials, the clinical evidence, real world evidence, all of this information that many regulatory bodies are looking for in the devices they're eventually going to approve. What is AKRA Team doing around this? And what are some of these increased challenges for medical device companies in regards to this additional clinical evidence that's required?
Yeah. It's a very important point because, as you mentioned before, there is no grandfathering. So what's going to happen based on the legislation, if we look to the legislation in Europe, is talking about manufacturers need to deliver sufficient clinical evidence for their products. And now it becomes actually a challenge. How much is sufficient? Who's going to define what is sufficient? In the past, you could pre-meet with a notified body and explain to them what you have and get their go or no go on your strategy. They didn't consult you, but they gave you actually an acceptance or a rejection, like a pre-submission meeting that you do with US FDA. This is not possible with notified bodies anymore because European legislators said this is not acceptable. It's a consultancy service, so they rejected it. So what do we do from AKRA team? What we do as an organization, manufacturers come to us and say, could you challenge with your view as a previous notified body expert, whether a notified body will see our clinical evidence to be sufficient, yes or no? We do that. So we tell them, we give them a gap assessment. We give them also a direction on how they can build their argumentation line. We write the document for them. We write a justification. We do literature searches for them. We help them actually building a scientific-based argumentation to decide on what is sufficient and what is not. If we come to the conclusion they have no data, we help them also on building a protocol for collecting data. We help them actually understanding how the data and which kind of data would be necessary for their devices. What we don't do, we are not a CRO, but we cooperate with a CRO. In case a manufacturer would need actually a full service, we say, okay, we can deliver to the protocol level, we can write a report, but the data collection with a CRO support need to be delegated to another organization who could help you on that.
Beautiful. Now, as you know, software as medical device is becoming rampant. It's, eventually we're going to see physicians writing, prescriptions for these medical apps or these, basically in a digital pharmacy potentially in the future. Are you finding that the advice and the information that you're giving to these particular manufacturers or software as a medical device different than what you're doing for devices that are actually physical in nature? And if so, what are those differences?
I mean, if we look to software as a medical device, they differ from normal medical devices based on the fact that a lot of these software as a medical device are built already based on a clinical association, which is valid. So what I mean with this, if you have a software as a medical device, which is just automatically calculating, for example, a dose based on an established method, you would need a different kind of data than when you have a software as a medical device, which is taking decisions which are not validated, then you need to validate that via clinical studies. Whereas a medical device, if you have an implantable device, you would be actually doing your clinical data collection, clinical study always, because it's not something that you can say, yeah, someone did it, so this is fine. Whereas a software could have actually different intention, and based on its intended purpose, you may have a different strategy. For the European legislation, for example, we have for software as a medical device, a different guidance on how to prepare a clinical evaluation than for standard devices, because of their actually characteristic and their functionality, which require a different focus on how you build your argumentation.
And sort of lingering a little bit longer on the software as a medical device, what regulatory changes do you foresee specifically on that area? And what I mean by that is a lot of these devices have smart algorithms built in them, machine learning. So a device today, let's just say implanted in a person and learning that person through data collection ambiently becomes a different machine or unit or medical device, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, because it's smarter, it has more data, it's incorporated in its algorithm. What is that regulatory pathway going to look for these types of units when they're not necessarily the same device from the day that they were originally approved?
So the device is still the same, but the device ability is extending based on real world actually experience. So I compare it actually to what we have at home, all of us. We have a lot of actually devices which are learning from our doing, and they're reacting based on the experience that they are collecting from us. And it's good to connect that to real-world evidence, because also with a medical device, you learn from post-market surveillance. My typical view always on medical devices, when I was at a notified body, I said, when a manufacturer comes to me and present to me a 1-year study for a long-term implantable, I say, this is nothing else than a good stomach feeling, because you are not getting the data. Reality is, when you do a post-market, when you collect more data, more user, then you understand your device much better. So if you have a software as a medical device and you get it to the market, you know what you know for the moment. What would be actually your knowledge is actually the years over the time that you're going to get actually knowledge by that device, by getting that machine learning more and more. And the good strategy for a manufacturer would be to use that real-world evidence, continuously improve the device, but also to develop new devices. And the system should be established in such a way that the learning from that system is used actively by the manufacturer to understand risk, to understand performance, to understand also potential mistakes connected with that device, to continuously improve the device. Now, from a regulatory point of view, I think regulators, all of us, we are still learning, because in the past, nobody had that situation. But today, when you get into your car, you expect your car to tell you where to go. And the car is telling you actually what are your habits. The same thing going to happen with medical devices. We're going to learn more. We're going to get more data, but we need to learn how to deal with those data. And I think regulators need to accept these kind of data, that this is a different approach for the future, which could help us also getting different way of treatment and patient-specific treatment in the future, which is very important for the continuous improvement and ensuring that the healthcare system is going in the right direction.
So you mentioned, of course, that there has changes been made in the EU. It is becoming increasingly more difficult based on all of these requirements. Global companies are looking at doing their launch first in the US and then deterring their release or their approval in the Europe for all of these reasons. Now, I guess the philosophical question here is, healthcare is highly disruptible right now. There's all kinds of issues in it. Does it feel a bit counterintuitive that all of these regulations and making it, and these barriers, if you will, to approvals for really important devices to modify and improve our healthcare system, are we putting a blockade there? How do you deal with this counterintuitive or this oxymoronic decision that we're making it more difficult, not less difficult, to disrupt healthcare?
I think this is a very critical situation for the moment, because if you look to legislations, they are never created to hinder innovation. They are written in a way to give you a frame how you act. The problem which I see by implementation of legislation, that the human being implementing those legislation and reading what is written is becoming actually more critical and becoming a burden sometimes. So my recommendation to people acting in this field, read the regulation as an opportunity and read it not as a possibility to say no. Make use of the wording in a way which is pragmatic and reasonable. Consider yourself, if you are a patient, what would be your expectation? And the problem with people getting into regulation, reading this like a black on white, not understanding what would be the impact if I kill it like that, this would lead to actually a burden, like you mentioned, and the blockade. We need to make sure that regulation never become a burden. Regulation should be an enabler to protect the patient as well, but we cannot protect the patient by having no device at the end. Protection should be by having devices with a benefit risk profile which is acceptable, but there is no device with zero risk. There is no device will be perfect from the beginning. We learned over the time by experience, by post-market data, and going back to your software as a medical device. If we will not allow them to get to the market, we will not learn what's going to happen in 2-3 years, because this would allow us to improve and being more effective. And we did this learning already in COVID time. If we didn't allow access, we wouldn't be here today. We would be struggling from pandemic situations the next 10 years again. So we need to be more acceptance to the risk connected with potential devices, but we need to take a decision, and this is very important in such a process.
Beautiful and well said. I think we'll end that there. For anybody who is interested in speaking with Dr. Bassil Akra to learn more about what their services are, you're a new software as a medical device, or any company that actually has a medical device and you want to partner, collaborate, work together, do a clinical trial or protocol with them, please look for Dr. Akra's contact details in the show notes below. We also encourage you, if you like this show, check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations that we have between sponsors and manufacturers and physicians, payers, allied healthcare providers, and patients, working asynchronously and synchronously through a series of touch points to help with their brand launches, clinical studies, treatment pathway profiles, all sorts of interesting work that can be done really efficiently and effectively. We want to thank everybody for their time today. Please like and subscribe. We'd also really appreciate if you can leave some feedback on iTunes. Thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Akra, for a wonderful conversation today.